Hello, everybody. Welcome to On Our Success. I'm your host, JD, and I'll be hosting a lot of international successful people from different careers, entrepreneurs, celebrities, sports figures, business owners, name it. Everybody's going to be here talking to us. And today, I'll have the great opportunity to talk to Miss Nancy, and she's my guest for today. Thank you for being live with us, Miss Nancy. Uh,
Thank you for having me.
Please introduce yourself so our audience can get to know you.
My name is Nancy, and I am 62 years old. I live in downtown Houston in a high-rise on the corner of Walker and Main, which if you put a pin into a map of Houston would be directly in the center of downtown Houston. This weekend we had protests, most of them peaceful. We also had some violence, just a little bit, and it occurred at the corner of my building. For my background, I will tell you that I'm a retired vice president of a major bank in the United States. I was a treasury management officer and dealt with global clients throughout the world and help them with their banking needs to transfer money and data and information amongst their many business organizations in different parts of the world. So I was part of the banking global SWAT team whenever we ran into problems getting data or money moved. I was assigned during Hurricane Katrina. I was assigned as a project manager to a project to deliver debit cards to victims and refugees of Hurricane Katrina in conjunction with the federal government and the U.S. Treasury Department. So my background is very much in finance, but it also introduced me to the world and to how things are done differently in other countries and how we have to cross that fence between countries that do things differently. I met JD this weekend during the heightened protests and marches after the death of George Floyd at the hands of a police department in Minneapolis. George Floyd was raised here in Houston, and so Houston has become the epicenter of how the world is responding to George Floyd's death in a peaceful manner. And we had 60,000 people march yesterday with no incidents of violence. So it was a success here in Houston and didn't make the national news or the international news because it was a success. So my background as far as political activism goes is I was raised by a career U.S. Air Force captain who got a PhD in political science from the University of Texas. And when I was young, he worked at the University of Texas, and I went to my first protest in 1969 to a large protest that was known as Moratorium Day during the Vietnam War, where 50,000 people were at the University of Texas protesting the war. I was 11 years old, and I've been protesting ever since. I did not participate in this protest because I live on the protest route with a fairly good view from 15 floors up of what's happening on the ground. And because of COVID-19 and my age and a medical condition makes me more susceptible to COVID-19, so I chose not to march in this march. Genealogical background, my mother's side of the family has been here since the Pilgrims. They came on the Mayflower. I'm descended from 6 of the people on the Mayflower on my mother's side. She was the first of her family in 14 generations to leave Massachusetts to come to Texas. My father's side has been here for 3 generations, and they are from Scotland. My maiden name is MacDonald. The part of me that is descended from Pilgrims is mostly Quaker, and Quakers are, as a group, part of their tenets are nonviolence. And typically they do not fight in wars, they don't take up arms, they will serve their country in a non-combative position. So I've been fighting for justice for all types of people and for all reasons since 1969. So
Wow.
thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for being with us on 1 Hour Success. It's actually a great time to be here. Both of us from different backgrounds. I'm African from Angola, actually, and represent Africans, black people in general. Just talking a little bit about what you just said. And one of the main reasons that is very good for us to have this conversation is based on what's happening outside. Let's start by asking you, what do you do for a living now that you retire from your banking career?
So I'm too young for Social Security or to tap into my retirement funds without paying a penalty. So I rely on the income of my spouse, and he is still employed, and he's been at the same company for 40 years as an IT professional. And he has a PhD in physical chemistry, which is the same degree that Angela Merkel has.
Mm-hmm.
So he's involved in the oil and gas world, in the IT part of that world.
Okay.
So I'm very fortunate and very privileged to have that in my life and to rely on that income to keep me, to sustain me in my lifestyle.
I'm learning on how to become successful, and as much as I talk to people that everybody says that behind, or not behind, but next to a very successful man, that is a successful woman, or a successful,
Or vice versa.
Yes, that makes him successful. And going forward a little bit for what you just said about your background. In your family, you came from a straight white family, right? There is no mix in your family until now, or do you have any mix in your family back
Mix
then?
as in what?
Mix as anybody that married, or if your grandparents ever married anybody that is in other race but white.
Oh yes, yes.
Yeah,
So
mixed families and stuff.
So my great grandmother on my paternal side, through the line that married into the Scottish. My great great grandfather was white, and he served in the Civil War from the state of Iowa, and he served on the Union side and was captured and was kept in a prison in the southern part of the United States, in Georgia, that was very infamous for its brutality and for its death rate, called Andersonville. And when he returned from the war, he survived the war, and when he returned to Iowa from the war, he married a black woman and had a family. So basically my great great grandmother was an enslaved person before the Civil War, and although I have no proof of that, because there were no records for black persons before the Civil War as far as proving that, or very few records anyway.
But that's pretty
That
much,
is, so I
pretty
do
much,
have what in the United States we refer to as one drop of blood. And so in Louisiana, they used to actually have laws about the measurement of the drop of blood.
Oh, wow.
I happen to be 1/32nd black.
Okay.
So in Louisiana, I would be considered to be of mixed race, because that was their definition of one drop of blood, was to be 1/32nd black.
Okay.
And so yes, I do, genealogically, blood-wise, I do carry that blood. I do not carry the culture.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a big distinction in that, because if you don't carry the culture and you don't have the knowledge that is passed with a culture, then you can't really speak to the oppression that afflicts that culture. And I also happen to, besides my my professional background and my family background, I've been a genealogist for 50 years. And I've spent the last 10 years almost exclusively studying African American genealogy on a volunteer basis. And I've documented 4,800 families in Texas, African American families in Texas and their roots. And I do it on a volunteer basis because I love genealogy and I have the time. So that's what I do in my retirement age, is I do genealogy. So it usually bores everybody, but I love it. It's like putting together a puzzle.
Well, that brings me to a really good point, because so basically you never, I mean, in your family or because of your bloodline, there was, but your parents were white, right?
Yes.
But were you raised into a white point of view of racism, or were you raised in a mixed type of people only type of view about people? Let me make this question again, because
That's okay.
well, what I'm trying to ask you is, was you raised into racism family or not? You were open to be more other cultures, other races, because it's different. The people that don't live in America is different, and everywhere else in the world. How you raise your kids defines how they become.
Right, and I think
I can tell you're a really good person, but I don't know about your background. I don't know about your.
So I think in my introduction, I mentioned that my mother's family was from a Quaker background in the nonviolence, and they believed in equality for women in 1630. So women, races, nonviolence is very much the hallmark of being a Quaker. So yes, culturally that was passed down to me on my mother's side. On my father's side, the 3 generations from Scotland, they were very warlike in Scotland because they tended to be oppressed by the British, so they had to be warlike. So that was that war part, and obviously my father being a career Air Force officer, the military part was very much a part of my upbringing as well. I was born in Japan on well, I wasn't born on a military base, but I was born just outside in a small village in Japan. And so I've always carried that foreign-born American title, right?
Okay.
But because my father went and got his PhD in political science during the 1960s, during a time of civil unrest in our country that led to great social change, the topic was always a dinner table conversation at our home, and I was taught from that dinner table conversation equality for everyone. We are all created equal. Okay. No matter where we're born, no matter where, who our parents are, no matter the color of our skin physically or the one drop of blood that we carry, we are all equal, and we should be treated by our governments equally. And it's the unequal treatment by governments that causes the social unrest. So the people who are marching this week in the United States are pointing out that unequal treatment. And in America, equal treatment under the law is guaranteed to us in our Constitution. And so to see it continue on 150 years after the Civil War points out that we have failed as a society, as a government, a democratic government that is elected by our people. We have failed to address the unequal treatment of our citizens for 150 years. So since Reconstruction. So, yeah, I was raised believing in that equality, and the upholding of that equality was part of my duty as a member of the human race.
So, what's your definition of success?
So, someone asked me, or asked everybody on Facebook one day, what is your definition? It's already been asked, and I've already answered it on Facebook, so I already had a head start.
Oh, great.
So, the answer is actually the legacy you leave after you leave the earth. That is the definition of success. And whether that legacy is known only to your friends and loved ones, or also includes your neighbors, or whether or not it includes the entire world, it's the legacy you leave when you die. You are successful if you have left a legacy. And that would be the memory of those people. For instance, George Floyd, who was murdered this past week by the Minneapolis police. He was not your typical definition of success in this life. You know, he struggled to overcome the systemic oppression that he inherited through generations of harm from our government. And you know, he went to high school, he went to parts of college, he got in trouble with the law a little bit. So he wasn't really he wasn't what you would typically call successful, right? But in dying the way he did, he has left a legacy that changed the entire world.
That changed the world.
Daddy changed the world. He did what?
That changed the world.
Daddy changed the world.
And so he is a definition of success because of that. He left a daughter who is now fatherless. He left an ex-spouse or partner who now can no longer rely on him to help support her child. He left brothers, and I don't know if his parents are alive, but he left friends in Houston in the Third Ward neighborhood where he grew up. But now he has the whole world to remember his legacy. So yeah, I think it's in your legacy. I think success is in your legacy. And I think many, many people measure success incorrectly.
Wow. That was great. Your answer was now the best answer of success I ever heard. At least.
Well, I had a chance because someone asked it on Facebook a couple of months ago.
You kind of wrote it down. Okay.
So I thought about it.
Audience and everybody that been on my channel, don't get mad. Literally, Miss Nancy had this answer before at some questions like this. And it was great because it comes from somebody with a lot of experience. Most of the people, besides somebody that I interviewed the other day, that was a gentleman from Africa, Angola, Riquinho. He's 57, and he kind of gave us a little bit of great examples of life and how to become successful as well. So that's your definition of success beats his. I'm sorry, Mr. Riquinho, but that was the best of two. Now yours is the second, and other people as well. That was great. And now I would like to know. What's your habits of success? What's your day-to-day habits, or what you usually do to keep being successful, to keep your legacy?
In my life, I try to do one thing, at least one thing intellectual every day, one thing spiritual, one thing physical, and I try to not be a harm to the people that I love. Right, to my friends and family. And I'm not always perfect at it, especially the physical part of it. I tend to skip that a lot. I start off every day doing 5 solitaire puzzles to keep my brain alive, and then move forward from there. Obviously, I have a spouse that I love very much, and I work very, very hard at that relationship to keep it going, and to make sure that he knows that I respect him. I respect his opinion, and I view him as a partner, an equal partner, and that I appreciate his help in my life. And I have a son who is 38. He's a United States Navy helicopter pilot. He's a lieutenant commander in the United States Navy. So he has also chosen a military career like my father.
What's his name again?
His name is Ben.
Man, thank you for being out there and doing your job.
So
Thank you.
he's an only child, and I'm very proud of the way he has lived his life and the choices he has made. And he's a very thoughtful, deep thinker, a very moral and ethical thinker. And I think that's all you can ask of your children, is that they think deeply and morally about what they do and choose in life. So I stay in touch with him. He is newly married, and I'm having my first grandchild on September 3rd, hopefully.
Wow, this great.
During an epidemic or pandemic. And
That'll be a bless.
yes,
It'll be a
yes.
bless for him too.
It's good to have something to look forward to, right? When
True.
times are hard, it's good to have some horizon in the future that you can look forward to, and that is mine, is that I'm going to be a grandparent, hopefully,
Yeah,
in September.
yeah.
And horizons, I'm glad I said that, because horizons is what gives people hope and determination to move forward. Once you've met your basic life needs of food, shelter, warmth, that sort of thing, if you don't have a horizon to reach forward to, it's very difficult to maneuver through life. And sometimes our societies or our governments or our social customs limit the horizons of people. They don't allow them to dream and to make steps to move forward, right? And when you talk about success, or you talk about career success in particular, which is the way most people define the meaning of success, is how much money you have in the bank, how well you did in your career, how far you got in education. Those are on the horizon for a lot of people, but sometimes they're not. They're not included in someone's horizon. So if you grow up in an urban ghetto in America, that horizon, you can't see it from your vantage point growing up in a ghetto.
True.
And unless someone takes you aside and shows you those steps toward that horizon, it might as well be on the other side of the world, because you can't see it.
Well, I'm gonna definitely go into one of the other subjects that we are here to talk about, which is racism.
Mhm.
We already talked a little bit, but how do you feel when you see a person of color? I would not just address as a black person, or because person of color is somebody that is different, you know, usually brings a different feeling. How do you feel when you see a Hispanic or a black person, especially a male? Usually there is a different feeling on females and males. I would like to know a little bit of both. Just a quick question so we can.
Well, what you're talking about is physical traits.
Yes.
What do you
just-
notice first about a person?
Mhm.
And that is their physical traits, right? So you notice if that person is male or female.
Mhm.
I'm female, so when I run into a male, that's one of the first conscious things that happens in my brain, is it tells me that's a male. Secondary to the gender, you identify that person by their physical characteristics, such as the color of their skin or their age, right? All those things filter in. There's nothing wrong with filtering that in. What's wrong is if you take that information and behave differently toward that person because of it, right? My personal prejudice that I have is based on my own experience that I'm more afraid of males than females. I'm more afraid of younger people than I am of older people or very young children. I am, in my life, which is very strange, but you have to take in consideration that I live in downtown Houston, an urban environment where I have wealthy neighbors and then homeless people as neighbors, right? So I've got a huge dichotomy of people that I come in contact with every day that I consider to be my neighbors.
Yes.
My own personal fear when I walk on the street is not from the homeless. It's not from the black men who come and go to the convenience store on the corner from all different parts of town. My fear is mostly white men who approach me to talk. And
Why? Why do you feel
it's a prejudice, right? It's a prejudice. And I think it's based on the fact that in my 62 years of living, the harm that I've experienced has been delivered by them.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So I guess
It's basically just a different experience.
Right.
Reflects on how you feel about
Yes.
different situations.
Yes, it's how you respond to fear. You learned fear, right, based on experience, and that learning to fear is manipulated by people in our society in order to control people, and so they instill fear in people that is unfounded. And really, your fear should be based on what you've academically learned about a situation or what you have personally learned about a situation because you've been a victim of something, right, that causes you to fear. Other than those two things, the academic learning or the personal learning, there are outside forces in our society that instill fear and take advantage of it in our world. Right, and they cause people to fear and to fear people of color.
That would definitely drive me to the next question, which is George Floyd's case. But before I go there, which is actually related to this, I'm gonna ask you a straightforward question a little bit. But I need to ask these questions because a lot of people out there at home and other places would like to have opportunity to ask a white person and also record, have this material to ask. When, and I'm gonna ask you this way because that's definitely how it is. When do you feel that your people is gonna stop killing white people, or when you feel that these things, these accidents, gonna stop happening?
Right, and like I said, they've been. In my opinion, they've been happening for 150 years since Reconstruction. Prior to Reconstruction, black people in the United States were not treated as citizens, right? And then the Civil War ended that. You had to start treating them as citizens, but did anybody start treating them as citizens? No. So we've been dealing with it for 150 years. We've made great strides. Obviously, Reconstruction was an attempt at that, but it was a failed attempt, and we've never revisited that as a country, that was a failed attempt, and that we needed to make reparations for that. And by reparations, I don't necessarily mean the reparations that are currently around the world in a buzzword about cash payments to people or anything else who were descendants of slaves, although obviously as a genealogist, I have strong feelings about reparations and believe that some financial reparations need to be made, right, as part of the solution.
So do you think adjustment on financial would help in these situations?
I do think it's part of striving toward that perfection of treating everybody equally.
Equal jobs, equal opportunities.
Right.
What you're talking about.
That's a debatable question that is going to go on for a long time.
No, but just
People are actively
your
debating
opinion
it.
of what you're seeing. That's why I'm asking you.
It's part of the solution to me. It's part of the solution.
Just give.
Reparations is part of the solution.
Okay.
Financial reparations.
And
Yeah.
when you say us, we don't, or when you said, actually you said them, they don't do the check. You're talking about the government
Right.
of the United States,
Right.
but the government is different from state to state as well.
We do have state government, and then we have
And they actually
federal.
have more, not more power, but they have a better active power and to the communities and to make a difference and change. That's why we see difference in between there is states that are more racist than others. So my main point on that is, do you feel like each state should start doing their part on stop the racism that would affect other states and then definitely change the government's type of stand of view about this particular racism?
Well, racism as a legal question is a federal obligation, right? It's defined in our Constitution that all men are created equal, which, although they used the terminology men, it was all people, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not just men, it's not just women, it's not white men, it's not, So by all men are created equal, they're saying basically that everybody is created equal, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that has not been true in the United States. But it is a federal mandate that we have, right, to make sure that they are. And so the federal mandate takes precedence over any state law. And in the United States, we have federal laws that override anything a local government would do. For instance, the Civil Rights Act that happened in 1965, in what I would say is the last time that we had major upheaval on this issue. And we made great strides after the civil rights era in the 60s. We made some good steps towards providing a country where everyone was treated equally, but not enough, obviously.
Okay.
So for it to erupt again,
Needs a little bit more change.
50 years later, it's obvious we still have work to do. So we can only take steps, right? But typically, whenever you have upheaval like this, you have the greatest, most progressive legislation that comes out of that upheaval. For instance, I mentioned the Civil Rights era and the Civil Rights Act that came out of that, the Voting Rights Act, different things like that came out as a result of that era. The laws that now prevent buses from dividing up the bus line so that black people have to sit in the back of the bus and white people sit in the front of the bus. All of that legislation that happened.
Right now we do by option.
Yeah.
It used to be something that we used back in history was they forced us to do it, but now we do by option actually. Just to kind of bring a little bit of fun on what we're talking, because like everybody has noticed the difference, but for you to call somebody racist is when they act racist. Everybody knows the difference between colors and everything, and I just feel like the racism comes when they don't respect this difference.
Right.
And actually it goes to my next question, which is nowadays racism and also this brutal violence happening is not just happening to black people or people of color. It's happening to white people as well. I've been watching and seeing a lot of violence from the police to white males and females as well, which is not racism on everybody's eyes because they're white, but the treatment is being literally the same. That's why we see more racists on the streets. Do you think is also something needs to change on the police way of treating people in general, not just people of color?
Well, supposedly they've instituted, because of all of the past tragedies that we've had, that police departments have instituted steps to ensure that their officers are trained adequately and are have the sensitivity training to understand and identify when they're approaching a sit-in, someone on the street.
I think they all fell, a majority of them fell on this point. I'm
So
sorry.
they've
That's-
had the
that's true.
training,
They just
but
don't
whether
wanna
they
do
choose
it?
to listen to it and apply it is something else.
Okay.
Now, I will say that having observed firsthand from 15 floors above the behavior of the Houston Police Department, I was heartened to see that their training kicked in. It seemed to me that Houston, the fourth largest city in the United States, some people think it's the third, I'm one of them, but that's debatable.
Yes.
But it is a very, very large, diverse city. And we had a march with 60,000 people with no violence. And that is kudos to our police department who protected the marchers. They realized that their job duty that day was not to guard the property of the city, but to protect the marchers. And so nothing bad happened. And our mayor was involved in the march, and our United States Representative Sheila Jackson Lee was involved in the march. Our Texas Senator Sylvia Garcia was involved in the march. So all of our role models were involved in the march, right? And role modeling is so much more important to change people's behavior than laws are. And so, for instance, like just a quick comparison is the mask wearing, right? It's not a law that you have to wear a mask. It's role modeling and information that has convinced people to wear a mask during COVID-19. It wasn't a law.
That's a good point that you mentioned that. I don't think our president the president of the United States thinks like that because
But he doesn't wear the mask, right?
So you're saying, you don't think he's doing?
Modeling is very important.
So he's not
It's
being a good example.
such a
in this case,
big
at
part
least in
of
this
the
case,
message,
we-
big part.
We're gonna get there. I'm gonna ask you a little bit more questions, but so you think in this case specifically, he's not sending a good message now by not wearing a mask.
Right, for the COVID-19 by not wearing a mask, with the racial unrest and the civil rights in the United States not being equally applied, and the tragedies that result from that. He has what in the United States we call the bully pulpit. He can come out and talk to Americans about it. He can come out and model behavior that he wants people to see by the modeling, right? And instead of coming out and speaking to Americans about what's happening, that so many are anguished by, he decided to do a photo op across the street from the White House where he held up a Bible in front of an Episcopal church. And a photo op in and of itself isn't so bad. That's kind of modeling. But what happened before he got there, which was that he had to use federal military to clean out all the peaceful protesters between him and the church in order to have that photo op. And in doing so, he also had them tear gas innocent bystanders, the medics, the journalists, in particular, the Episcopal priest and the workers at the church who were not given warning about the tear gas and had to abandon the church because of it. So his modeling was not good in that regard, that was not a good message to send to the American people. And then there is great debate as to whether or not the use of force of the military, the federally based police that were there, whether it was the Park Service or the National Guard or the U.S. Army helicopter, it was against his own people. And there is, in my book, that's an impeachable offense. That rises above and beyond every other impeachable offense that this man has committed. And we rely on our senators to safeguard us from that impeachable behavior. But so far, they have not stood up and said that they are against that behavior. And that's unfortunate because people will continue to be in the streets as a result.
So basically, before we go any further, I would like to ask you, you voted for Trump, right?
Did I vote for Trump?
Mhm.
No, I did not
Oh, you
vote for
didn't?
him. No.
Oh, okay. That was, and that's surprising, not because of because of you, but because of the states we live on it.
Because we live in Texas?
Yes, we live in Texas, and to be honest with you, I feel different of Trump before becoming a president and now. There's a few things that I see, and my judgmental goes a little bit more than just a man. I see as a president. I'm not saying I agree or disagree. I just see a little bit outside the box of everything that happens on before he became president till now, and that will define later on in life if I like him or not. I think, like you said, legacy.
What is your legacy?
Yes,
Yeah.
his legacy I'll be able to judge later on because I see just my point of view. Let me clarify everybody at home. My point of view of what's happening, and also the President Donald Trump right now, he's put in one of the hardest situations and positions ever, or one of the most difficult situations to become a president, to be a president. I'm just talking about right now. And we'll see. I'm excited to see how it turns out. Hopefully he comes to a great solution to American people in all these different aspects.
Don't hold your breath.
I mean, I'm saying because I have to expect the best.
You hope for the best.
I hope, yes, I hope for the best, and I'm the type of people that I like to give people the opportunity, even though he's having an opportunity. So let's see until then. You know, let's not judge because we don't have any other president right now. We cannot impeach him. You know.
Well, no, we have a succession.
Yes.
You know, we have a list of succession.
No, but I'm
so
talking about right now. All we got
at
to
this
do-
moment, no,
Yeah.
because the senators have not taken steps to impeach him. But that was an impeachable offense.
Against
Taking violent action against his own people is an impeachable offense.
No.
Yeah.
I'll let you talk a little bit more about that. What I was trying to mention is my message was pretty much just I just want to see at the end, you know, how all this turns up, and that's my message.
Well, I will tell you this: that people paint everyone with a broad brush when it comes to who they voted for president, and you know, there are prejudiced views about what it means to be a Texan, when in reality, you know, it's what, like 46% against 51% or something in Texas when it comes to that blue-red divide that we have in our country. So it's not, Texas is not exactly red Trump country. It's
but it's red,
closer.
But it's a red.
You are going to run into just a little bit of half the population in Texas that is going to be anti-Trump, right? And to think that just because he carried the state by 9 points in the 2016 election means that all Texans, that most of them that you run into are going to be in favor of him is probably a broad brush.
The state of Texas is a Republican. I'm sorry.
I will say that the voting
yes, that's what I'm
part
trying
of the state
yes.
is majority Republican. But the greatest problem that we have in the U.S. and in Texas too, because Texas is 49th in voter participation, is that people do not choose to participate by voting in their democracy. That is a very huge underlying problem. So
do you think that would affect, if more people voted, do you think that would affect and all these issues that we live in right now, including racism?
Oh yes, most definitely, because the blue-red divide that they always color everything,
It's because a lot of people don't vote.
that prism that we look through on every issue is the blue-red divide. That blue-red divide can only be defined by the voters who were eligible to vote, who exercised that right and went out to vote. And that is a very small percentage of the country that is eligible to participate in our democracy. So that's the biggest problem, is that we don't vote.
I'll come back and get another
But you should
lesson.
never believe that the results of the vote are indicative of how the people feel. Because when the people are pushed too far, you end up with people in the streets, which is what we've had the past week, right? People in the streets.
All right. I'll definitely come back and get another lesson on government and all the subjects. I need to learn a lot, but also leading to what we saw yesterday and our
Yes.
main point. First, I would like to ask you to tell me about your experience of seeing 60,000 people. Let me say it again. 60,000 people marched in Houston in front of us yesterday, historically, to make a change. How you felt about that?
Oh, it thrills me to my core that people felt strongly enough that they came out. I mean, I would love for it to be 100,000 or 1,000,000. You know, when Martin Luther King went and spoke in front of the Washington Monument and gave his "I Have a Dream" speech, I mean, there were millions of people there, right? People standing in the water because it's surrounded by a pond to hear him speak, right? And the only real change, like I mentioned earlier, or not the only real change, but the most progressive giant leaps we take are always after people go to the streets. And when you look at the labor laws in the United States, those started happening in the Gilded Age to the 1920s, when we had a lot of industrialization going on and people dying and companies actually killing their workers. You know, we had instances where Standard Oil killed some of their workers, you know, and I mean, that there was huge public outcry about that. People took to the streets to say, this is wrong, this is not right, this should not happen in America. And so lawmakers instituted changes that led to OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Hazard Act. That act came about as a result of people going in the streets and saying, this is not right. Companies need to be safe. They need to provide a safe place for their workers to work. So, I mean, every major progressive step we've taken, by progressive, I don't mean liberal. I don't mean that in a liberal Democrat sense or a liberal libertarian sense. I mean that in a progressive, in that we've made steps forward for humanity to live and live free in a safe world. That's what I'm talking about progression, right?
Yes.
That we are moving forward as the human race in that regard. That happens after people take to the
Let me
streets.
go back to the question. How do you feel about the homicide of George Floyd? Just a quick explanation so we can go a little bit more into it. How do you feel about the homicide of George Floyd on May 25th, 2020?
Well, I use Twitter and I use Facebook, and so I saw the video fairly shortly after the first video was released, and I was horrified. I was physically ill. I wanted to throw up. I mean, it's just any time that you witness the death of another human being, you're going to be affected that way. If you're not, I mean, I have to question your humanity if you're not affected by seeing someone die.
Or your background.
Yeah. So, I would say that I agree with the people that point out that this has occurred for the last 150 years in the United States on a routine basis, but it's just in the last 20 years that we've had video of it, right? or direct evidence where people can see what happened with their own eyes. And even in seeing, there is a degree of error, because there are different angles, there's different context. You don't know what led up to it. You don't know what happened afterwards. You can only judge what you're seeing from the vantage point of the person who took the video, right? But prior to, say, 2000, we really didn't have that much video of when an instance like this occurred. We only had the say-so of the victims, survivors, telling us what happened.
So you think technology is helping
to expose it?
To expose it,
yes.
And also, but do you think exposing is gonna help coming to an end? By exposing, usually people get more.
Yes, because it convinces more people
Mm-hmm.
that it's actually happening.
So you
right?
think technology is helping racism to come into an end?
Oh yes, oh definitely. It's part of the solution, but it's also part of the problem in some regards, as in that video can be manipulated, and when people are outraged already, they are operating at an emotional level of outrage that doesn't allow them to use their logic to question what they're seeing, right? So they're responding to everything that happens right now by outrage. So bad actors are now producing video that is doctored of other horrible instances that may or may not be true, right? That we don't have the context on, we don't know when it happened, we don't know where it happened, we don't know who the victim is, we don't know who the aggressor is. They're just posting video on our technology platforms because everybody's at a heightened outrage level.
We don't know what's true or not.
Yeah, so that is the danger of technology, is that it on the one hand, it can be a force of good. On the other side, it can be a force of evil, right? And yeah, it's part of the solution.
Okay. What's the message you could send right now to George Floyd's family and all? I'll start by just asking, what message can you send to George Floyd's family right now? A message of comfort, of hope, of justice, of changes about to happen. A positive message to also help them go through this moment.
I would say that, number one, I'm sorry for their pain. Number two, I share in their sorrow. And number three, his legacy will live on forever, as long as there are human brains thinking and a way of recording history. His legacy of success will live on. That's what I would say.
This is the beginning of the fight. It's not the end of the fight. George, I read on the front page of the New York Times this morning, you said you wanted to touch the world. Well, God had already made you for that. But you didn't touch it in a basketball court or football court. God had something else for you to do. Because all over the world, George, they're marching with your name. You touched the world in South Africa. You touched the world in England. You touched every one of the 50 states. Even in a pandemic, people are walking out in the streets, not even following social distance, because you've touched the world. And as we lay you to rest today, the movement won't rest until we get justice, until we have one standard of justice. Your family is going to miss you, George, but your nation is going to always remember your name, because your neck was one that represented all of us, and how you suffered represented our suffering. So we're going to lay you near your mama now. You called for mama. We're going to lay your body next to hers. But I know Mama's already embraced you, George. You fought a good fight. You kept the faith. You finished your course. Go on and get your rest now. Go on and see Mama now. We gonna fight on. We gonna fight on. We gonna fight on. We gonna fight on.